The story opens with young Jean frozen still, grocery bags falling and cans of food scattering onto the ground. He seemed unaware of his surroundings, an unsettling feeling hanging in the air as the sun dipped below the horizon. Suddenly, his eyes widened in shock as he looked up at the sky, noticing an enormous shape above. He muttered in disbelief, recognizing the ominous form of a snake coiled in the clouds above the city. The massive dragon-like creature revealed its sharp fangs and glowing red eyes, towering over young Jean and letting out a threatening growl. He was paralyzed by fear, staring at the terrifying sight dominating the skyline. Breaking free from his shock, young Jean started to run in sheer panic, but before he could escape, he tripped and crashed to the ground, his face slamming into the pavement. The creature drew nearer, closing in on him. Young Jean stood up, holding his head in confusion, still trying to understand what had just happened. A shadowy figure then approached him, radiating an ominous aura with glowing eyes and a calm expression. This mysterious figure revealed that the terrifying beast in the sky was a dragon, sending chills down young Jin's spine. He stared in disbelief, unable to grasp the enormity of the situation unfolding before him. Suddenly, young Jin woke up, his eyes wide with shock, trying to comprehend what had just transpired. He glanced around his simple room, morning light filtering through the window, unsure if the terrifying events had been real. Sitting up on his bed, he rubbed his head, wondering if everything he had seen was just a dream. Confused, he muttered to himself, attempting to piece together the unsettling visions of the dragon and the mysterious figure. Feeling the morning chill, young Jin adjusted the room's temperature and tried to make himself comfortable. He crouched by the rice cooker, only to discover that there was barely any rice left, causing him to frown at his dwindling food supply. As he opened a fresh pack of rice, he stared at it quietly, his expression reflecting his tired and uncertain mood. He knew something was off, but for now, his focus remained on getting through his daily routine. Young Jin grabbed some cooking supplies from the shelf, but quickly abandoned the idea of cooking as he headed out of the kitchen. He walked to the bathroom and turned on the tap, preparing for his usual morning routine. While brushing his teeth, he contemplated his empty stomach, deciding to find something to eat later. Despite the simplicity of his morning, a sense of unease lingered, hinting at the troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. Young Jin stepped out into the alley, walking through the quiet neighborhood with a bag of supplies in hand. His expression remained distant, reflecting his internal thoughts as he navigated the empty streets. A small dog caught his attention, barking at something it was digging through in a trash pile. Young Jin watched curiously, slightly concerned about the commotion the animal was causing. The dog continued to dig through the trash, making a mess while young Jin watched with a mix of concern and annoyance. He threw something away, his size clearly indicating he was preoccupied by his own thoughts as the dog kept barking. Soon, young Jin arrived at a convenience store, walking down the aisles as he looked at the neatly arranged products. His gaze landed on the pet food section, where colorful cans with cute designs momentarily broke his somber mood. Young Jin knelt down and offered the dog a piece of food, trying to stop it from eating the trash. He watched the dog eagerly take the snack, feeling a slight sense of relief that it was no longer digging through the garbage. As the dog bit into the treat, it quickly dropped the remaining piece on the ground. Young Jin sighed and muttered a warning not to eat trash, standing up to leave the scene. Young Jin walked down the street, his back to the barking dog, as he blended into the daily bustle of the city. Cars honked and people talked on their phones, going about their business while he put on his earphones to tune everything out. Checking his phone, he glanced at a message from his work reminding him of upcoming shifts. As he read through the notifications, his expression remained unreadable, focused solely on the information displayed on his screen. Young Jin walked through the busy city streets, looking up at the tall buildings surrounding him. He headed toward his school, hearing a distant voice calling out to close the back door. Inside the classroom, he glanced at his phone while a classmate teased him about his personality type. Ignoring the banter, he prepared to move on to class 5 while a girl called after him. A girl called out to her friend, asking where she was headed. Her friend replied that she was going to class 5. Hearing this exchange, some classmates turned to someone and asked him directly, "Are you a tarot reader?" One of the classmates then chimed in, suggesting they should all get readings. He mentioned that he had wanted a fortune told the previous day and now intended to ask both the fortune teller and, gesturing towards young Jin, possibly him as well. The girls then continued towards Class 5. Shortly after, another boy walked by, the scene returning to the usual flow of school life. As the student walked away, he called back to young Jean, reminding him, "Don't forget to tell him it's your birthday, right? Happy birthday." Young Jean offered a brief, casual thanks in response. The two girls continued on their way towards Class 5. Young Jean, witnessing the scene, muttered under his breath, expressing his skepticism. Seriously, he questioned, how many gullible people are there these days who actually believe in this tarot stuff? His thoughts were interrupted by a murmuring sound nearby, indicating someone was engaged in fortune-telling close by. The conversation among the onlookers subtly shifted to the fortune-teller's supposed accuracy. Someone mentioned quietly, almost reverently, that the fortune-teller was believed to be accurate because her mother was a shaman. The scene briefly shifted focus to the location where the fortune-telling was actively taking place. A voice commented on the high price, noting that the fortune-teller charged 10,001 per session. Another voice, coming from behind, remarked on the fortune-teller's earnings. "Forget asking why people are into this cultish stuff." The implication was clear: the primary motivation for the fortune-teller was likely financial gain. The focus returned to young Jean, who appeared to be observing, or perhaps even targeting, the fortune-teller's activity. A faint, cynical smile played on his lips as he watched. "Idiots," he murmured softly, almost to himself, before putting his earphones back in. With this gesture, he seemed to dismiss the entire scene and the people involved, choosing to tune out the world around him once more. Young Jean internally mused, a cynical edge to his thoughts: "I was born, and everyone else is born. We all live the same life, the same predictable routine." He caught himself glancing sideways, imagining his own reflection in some unseen observer's eyes. "It probably looks like I have a lot to say," he thought, "but it's always better for me to just stay quiet. That's what everyone expects anyway." He allowed a faint, almost imperceptible, smirk to play on his lips, a silent joke at the expense of the world around him and its predictable expectations. Just then, a sudden impact jolted him. A hand slammed hard onto his back. "Happy birthday," a boisterous voice boomed, breaking through his internal monologue. One of the classmates handed young Jean a small birthday gift, awkwardly explaining that he didn't know what young Jean would like, so he brought a variety of buns. Young Jean laughed at the absurdity of receiving buns as a birthday present but appreciated the gesture nonetheless. The classmates joked about the birthday bun as they shared the snacks, with one of them offering the rest to the group. Young Jean accepted it with a smirk, thinking to himself that at least his breakfast was now taken care of. The group shared a laugh over the simple drinks and birthday buns, joking about spending all their money on such small things as they talked about plans for the day. One of them suggested grabbing pork cutlets after school while young Jean silently ate his bun amid the teasing about birthday dinners. The classmate paused, his expression shifting slightly as he asked, "Who family has dinner here on their birthday?" His friend, listening intently, reacted with a surprised, "Is it really?" Another friend chimed in, his voice filled with anticipation, "I'm waiting for our school to finish, it must be today's," hinting at some after-school birthday plan. Just then, another guy walked by their side, casually offering a cheerful, "Happy birthday, young Jean." A fellow student warned that he was late, threatening to inform the homeroom teacher. A classmate warned young Jean to be cautious after having a strange dream about breaking his teeth, hinting that it might involve someone getting hurt. Young Jean brushed it off, but the classmate insisted he was serious despite the others making light of the situation. The classmate bet that his dream would come true, offering a 10-to-1 wager if no one got hurt. The group laughed it off but agreed to the bet, amused by his nervousness despite his confidence in his dream predictions. One of the boys enthusiastically bet 10,001 that their classmate, Quan Yangan, would get hurt today as he hit young Jean, much to the amusement of the group. The chaotic scene escalated as they began making more bets, playfully pushing each other around while hitting young Jean. Amid the shoving, someone pointed out that Quan Yangan had just gotten hurt, causing the group to burst into laughter. They all scrambled to collect their winnings while another classmate joked about making a profit, prompting the others to demand their share. One of the boys dramatically raised the stakes, betting 50,001 that their classmate wouldn't get hurt, which stirred excitement among the group. The atmosphere in the classroom intensified as everyone eagerly placed their bets, the tension mounting with each wager. Young Jean, observing the chaotic scene, found himself amused by the absurdity of it all. As he left the classroom, he suddenly bumped into someone, causing a deck of tarot cards to scatter onto the floor, taking him by surprise. He quickly apologized to the girl as they both crouched down to retrieve the scattered cards. Embarrassed by his clumsiness, Young Jin admitted he hadn't been paying attention to where he was going. As he handed the cards back to the girl, his eyes were drawn to one card in particular, the hangman. Confused by its imagery, he handed it over, mentioning that he believed he had picked up all the cards that had fallen, though the significance of that specific card lingered in his mind. Young Jin was puzzled when the girl suddenly grabbed his hand while he was still holding the hangman card. He wondered what she was doing, unsure of the situation unfolding. The girl looked at him with a gentle smile, still holding onto his hand and the card, while Young Jin stared back in confusion, uncertain of her intentions. Still perplexed, Young Jin asked the girl why she was holding his hand and what was going on. She remained silent for a moment, adding to the air of mystery. Then, she smiled warmly and asked if it was his birthday that day, catching him completely off guard. He responded hesitantly, wondering what the significance of his birthday was as she continued to hold the tarot card. Excitedly, the girl offered to read Young Jin's fortune, encouraging him to pick a card. Despite his reluctance and muttering that he didn't care for such things, she insisted on doing a reading just once. Meanwhile, a classmate approached with a broom, laughing as he jokingly told Young Jin to stay still before he got hurt amidst the betting chaos. Another friend, noticing the impending mayhem, warned Young Jin to run before things got serious again. The girl, noticing the commotion, shouted out a warning that the homeroom teacher was coming, causing everyone to panic and scatter. As the classroom emptied, her gaze shifted downward, and she noticed a single tarot card left behind on the floor. The image of the card lingered in her mind, its significance remaining a mystery for now. The girl knelt down to pick up the tarot card and was surprised to see it was the death card. She stared at it for a moment, its ominous imagery catching her attention. A classmate called out to her, asking what she was doing, but she remained quiet, staring at the card with a serious expression. The significance of the card weighed on her as she walked away, lost in thought. The school day continued quietly as the students sat in class, listening to the teacher's explanation. Young Jin slumped over his desk, feeling drowsy and struggling to keep up with the lesson. As the teacher finished writing on the board, he instructed the class to write everything down. Noticing some students, including Young Jin, dozing off, the teacher jokingly threatened to let them feel the cold air outside if they didn't wake up. He joked about opening the window, but a few students protested, saying it was already cold. Young Jin reluctantly asked if he should open it, while his classmate, trying to catch up on notes, asked which page they were on. One of the students warned the class to focus, reminding them that they were in their first semester and needed to get serious. Young Jin listened quietly, amused by the intensity of his classmates' attitudes, but remained lost in his own thoughts. Young Jin glanced toward the window, where a strange shadow loomed outside, unsettling him. He looked closer, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, but it remained an eerie, undefined shape. His attention was broken when someone called out to him, asking for his name. Another student pointed out that he was the guy who had been staring at the hallway for a while, introducing him as Kwon Young Jin. Young Jin was clearly startled by something outside the window as he wondered if there was someone there. He hesitated to respond when asked about opening the window, unsure of what he had seen outside. Young Jin started questioning what he saw outside, feeling uncertain if he had really seen someone there. Meanwhile, another student joked around, capturing the attention of the class with his quirky behavior, causing everyone to laugh. Young Jin walked out of his classroom and noticed something strange in the hallway. Something caught his attention, and he looked out into the hallway, confused by what he thought he had seen, unsure if it was real. To his shock, Young Jin encountered Jung Sihoo, someone from his past, who addressed him in a hostile manner. This tense interaction made Young Jin reflect on their strained relationship. As the confrontation escalated in the hallway, Young Jin again encountered Jung Sihoo, and the tension between them was palpable. Jung Sihoo confronted him aggressively and made a mocking remark about Young Jin's appearance, but Young Jin tried to brush it off, feeling conflicted inside. Young Jin appeared surprised when Jung Sihoo, a familiar face from his past, confronted him and mockingly questioned his attitude. This caused Young Jin to grow frustrated as he tried to keep his emotions in check and avoid further provocation. As he attacked Young Jin, he, taken aback by the sudden aggression, attempted to defend himself but was overpowered by a stronger opponent. Just as things seemed to escalate even further, the girl from the classroom, the one with the tarot cards, stepped in. She called Young Jin her boyfriend, which confused Jang Sihoo. Jang Sihoo was startled when he saw her familiar face in front of him. He quickly recognized her as Lee-hoo and seemed shocked that she claimed Young Jin was her boyfriend. Young Jin was confused as Lee-hoo mentioned him as her boyfriend, making him wonder if it was some sort of punishment. He recognized her as the girl he had seen earlier with the tarot cards, leaving him completely puzzled by the situation. The girl, so what? What does it matter to you? Her tone was defensive, almost annoyed. I keep telling you again and again he was my boyfriend, I'm having a bit of trouble saying it, so. She trailed off, a hint of shyness in her voice. The boy burst into even louder laughter saying Young Jin, after all, what can I do against a girl, he chuckled, still finding the situation amusing. Later, he was caught in an awkward situation where he was accused of being close to a girl. Then, Jang Sihoo stepped in to make insulting remarks about Young Jin's appearance and mocking his background, pointing out his lack of wealth. Despite his attempts to keep calm, Young Jin was visibly affected by the bullying. Jang Sihoo then walked away laughing, feeling triumphant over his cruel comments. Lee-hoo showed concern, asking if Young Jin was okay and what the other guy had said to him. Young Jin looked down, not giving a clear answer, still affected by the previous interaction. As he asked her what she meant by calling him her boyfriend, rumors began to spread about them dating, but she said she didn't mind. Young Jin was taken aback when Lee-hoo confidently asked him to date her. Lee-hoo appeared cheerful and determined, leaving Young Jin utterly surprised by her sudden confession. He was confused and questioned if she was doing it as some sort of punishment, unable to believe her earnest declaration. However, Lee-hoo insisted with a genuine expression that she truly liked him, leaving Young Jin bewildered by her straightforwardness, though he couldn't shake the feeling she might be joking. As Young Jin walked down the hallway, a girl who had been watching him looked visibly upset after his rejection. Despite this, Lee-hoo continued to enthusiastically greet Young Jin, calling out his name in class and at the cafeteria, clearly persistent in her attempts to get his attention. Later, Young Jin received a strawberry milk carton with a heart-shaped note from Lee-hoo, making her intentions even more apparent, much to his confusion. Young Jin looked visibly uncomfortable as his friends teased him about the strawberry milk carton and the heart-shaped note from Huisoo. Despite his efforts to remain composed, his friends encouraged him to be honest about the situation, making it clear they were aware of the potential romance developing. As Young Jin sat with his friends, one of them teased him, asking if he was dating Lee-hoo, which Young Jin firmly denied. Suddenly, someone called out his name from behind, interrupting the conversation. As the scene unfolded, Young Jin's friends continued to tease him about having a girlfriend, pointing out a girl who seemed very eager to see him, creating playful tension. Young Jin appeared caught off guard by the sudden attention as his friends made remarks about the girl's interest in him. Lee-hoo enthusiastically called out Young Jin's name, smiling brightly as she caught his attention from the doorway. Her energy was undeniable, and it was clear her focus was entirely on him, bringing an unexpected shift to the room's atmosphere. Young Jin seemed surprised and embarrassed when his classmates assumed Lee-hoo, who was calling him, was his girlfriend. Lee-hoo eagerly called out Young Jin's name as he walked away, her persistence catching the attention of others in the hallway. He continued to ignore her, making her chase after him. As Lee-hoo persistently called Young Jin's name, he finally turned to confront her, visibly frustrated by her constant pursuit. He warned her to stop before he got angry, but she responded curiously, seemingly unfazed by his rising temper. Eventually, Young Jin, frustrated beyond measure, harshly declared that their relationship was over and that from now on they were strangers. Lee-hoo stood quietly, processing the intensity of his words, while Young Jin clenched his fists in frustration. As Young Jin checked his phone, he saw a group chat lighting up with playful banter, teasing him about spending time with a certain girl's friends. The teasing escalated, and his expression turned flustered as he hurriedly typed back in defense, denying the accusations while his friends continued to poke fun at him, clearly enjoying his reaction. Young Jin stared ahead in confusion as he stumbled upon a small dog in a dim alley, sitting by a spilled bowl of food. The dog's innocent eyes met his gaze, and despite the unexpected encounter, young Jean hesitated, unsure of how to react to the sudden and unusual situation. Young Jean recognized the stray dog, recalling how it used to scavenge through trash, realizing it was still surviving in the same spot. After glancing at the dog one last time, he headed up the dimly lit staircase to his apartment, only to pause as he heard a strange sound echoing from outside. Young Jean cautiously entered his apartment, glancing back nervously as if sensing something off. After settling in, he stared pensively out the window, deep in thought, when a sudden noise from the alley drew his attention, breaking the silence of the night. Young Jean watched the heavy rain pour down through his window, deep in thought, as the rhythmic drops tapped against the glass. Moments later, he was inside, drying off the little dog with a towel and a hairdryer, his face showing mild frustration as the pup squirmed and resisted the pampering. The little dog, now wrapped in a towel, scurried across the room and settled comfortably on Young Jin's bed, looking content as if claiming the space as its own. Young Jean smirked at the sight, amused, and soon after, he grabbed a bowl and some food, preparing to offer a proper meal to his unexpected guest. As Young Jean watched the dog eat, he contemplated its past, wondering if it was abandoned or lost its owner along the way. The thought lingered in his mind, and he even considered the possibility that the dog might have never had an owner, making its situation even more heartbreaking. The little dog eagerly jumped onto Young Jin's lap, showing a surprising burst of energy and affection. Caught off guard, Young Jean struggled to keep the excited pup from clawing at his chest, confused but trying to calm it down. As the dog continued to squirm restlessly, Young Jean sighed, reflecting on how the day had been full of unexpected events, including the lively dog now sitting contentedly at his feet. Just as he started to relax, he noticed something strange at the window, catching his attention and leaving him momentarily puzzled. A sudden knock startled Young Jean, and the dog immediately started barking loudly, adding to the tension. Glancing at the clock, he wondered who could be knocking at this late hour as he cautiously approached the door, growing more uneasy with each step. Young Jean nervously peered through the peephole but saw nothing, only hearing a faint, eerie voice calling his name. Shocked, Young Jean stumbled back as the voice insisted on familiarity, but growing fear prompted him to demand identification. To Young Jin's astonishment, Huisoo stood at his doorstep, an utterly unexpected sight. Utterly bewildered, he questioned her arrival, but her response was a cryptic remark about regret, alluding to past unresolved feelings in a relationship that, from Young Jin's perspective, had never existed. Caught completely off guard, Young Jin's shock deepened as he struggled to comprehend the situation. Before he could react further, he instinctively handed Huisoo a towel, urging her to use it as the rain poured down relentlessly. Young Jean and Huisoo then found themselves sharing umbrellas, walking together through the cold night. Still unsettled, Young Jean draped his jacket over her shoulders, yet his suspicion grew, and he pointedly questioned how she knew his address. Huisoo cheerfully admitted to following Young Jean, a revelation that stunned and frustrated him. His anger rising, he demanded answers, asking why she had followed him all the way home and what she truly wanted from him. Huisoo responded cryptically, questioning if Young Jean would give her what she wanted if she told him the truth. As the tension mounted, her expression darkened, and she chillingly declared, "I want you," leaving Young Jean frozen in shock and fear. Increasingly frustrated, Young Jean asked Huisoo if she was serious. Huisoo brushed off his question and told him to just go home, but her persistence escalated as she bluntly asked if he wanted money. Calmly, Huisoo offered Young Jean 100,000 won per hour simply to spend time with her, leaving him in utter disbelief. Skeptical, he questioned the source of such wealth, but she confidently displayed her bank balance, shocking Young Jean into silence. Baffled by Huisoo's offer, Young Jean wondered if she had lost her mind and if her parents were aware of her actions. However, Huisoo slyly pointed out that he hadn't actually refused yet. Moments later, a notification on Young Jin's phone confirmed the money transfer, leaving him stunned and questioning his own sanity. As Huisoo happily clung to his arm under the umbrella, Young Jean reflected on the absurdity of being paid 100,000 won an hour, a situation that felt deeply wrong despite the financial gain. Later, amidst classmates' gossip about his situation, Young Jean awkwardly asked Huisoo to keep their arrangements secret, suggesting they act as strangers at school. Huisoo teased him, questioning if he was afraid of rumors, her playful demeanor sharply contrasting his discomfort. Then, Huisoo made a cutting remark about Young Jin's lack of parents, catching him completely off guard and visibly shaking him. With a mischievous smile, she extended her hand, instructing him to treat her well, and when he hesitated, she playfully added that her hands were cold. Young Jin hesitated briefly before firmly telling Lee Hoo to leave, offering to return her money. Frustrated, he accused her of temporary insanity, handing her the umbrella and telling her to go back to school and spread whatever rumors she wanted. He was clearly overwhelmed by the bizarre situation. As the rain continued to pour, Lee Hoo, in a low voice, expressed her disdain for both money and girls, while Young Jin coldly remarked on her attitude. Suddenly, she delivered a chilling statement, telling him he was a guy who was about to die soon. Lee Hoo dramatically produced a tarot card, revealing the death card, and confidently asserted that her readings were always accurate, insisting that Young Jin would die that very day. As Young Jin attempted to calm her down, she suddenly screamed in frustration, angrily telling him to get a grip while stomping through the rain in a fit of rage. In a sudden burst of action, Young Jin grabbed Lee Hoo's hand and forcefully pushed her away, his anger and frustration finally erupting. The umbrella clattered to the ground as water splashed around them, and Young Jin fell to his knees, gripping her arm tightly, while Lee Hoo coldly stood over him. Panicked and confused, Young Jin yelled out in pain as Lee Hoo grabbed his leg with disturbing strength, pulling him off the ground. His body dangled upside down in the pouring rain as he stared wide-eyed at her, shocked by the sudden turn of events and the eerie control she seemed to possess. Young Jin, trembling with fear, gazed up at Lee Hoo standing ominously above him. His mind raced with confusion and disbelief as he noticed her hands, now cold and ghostly white, clasped together. She eerily muttered, "My hands are cold, right?" His sweat mingled with the rain, creating a surreal and chilling atmosphere. As his eyes shifted to the figure in front of him, his thoughts spiraled, wondering if he was seeing a costume or some strange makeup, unable to comprehend the reality of what was happening. In his shock, he muttered under his breath, Lee Hoo, doubting everything he thought he knew about her. Her ghostly hands stretched out towards him, each movement slow but deliberate, her voice calm yet haunting echoed through the downpour. "One last time," she repeated, "I'll ask one last time." Young Jin, frozen in fear and confusion, stared wide-eyed as she asked, "Can you give me your body?" The weight of her words hung in the air, sending shivers down his spine. Her form, towering and dark, demanded an answer. "Answer, yes or no," she commanded, her hands still ominously outstretched. The rain continued to fall, but in this moment, the world felt eerily still as Young Jin faced the terrifying decision before him. As the eerie figure began counting, the tension intensified with each second. "1," she said, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. He stammered, trying to form words, but nothing came out. "2," she continued, as she partially uncovered her face, her cold, haunting presence pressing down on him. Panic surged, and Young Jin's body instinctively reacted to escape. He glanced behind him, desperate for an exit. Before she could utter 3, Young Jin sprinted away, splashing through the rain-soaked street. As Young Jin sprinted through the rain, his heart racing, the terrifying figure pursued him with inhuman speed, her long limbs reaching out towards him. He was drenched in sweat and rain, his mind reeling in disbelief. Is this a dream?" he shouted, his breath ragged as his legs moved purely on instinct. His pulse quickened as he felt the grip of fear tightening, realizing that this nightmare might be terrifyingly real. The creature lunged, its cold, bony hand smashing through the ground as it closed in on Young Jin. He barely dodged, but the impact sent him flying through the air, his body hurled violently as the rain lashed against him. The force of the attack was too overwhelming to escape. His mind raced, adrenaline surging, but before he could recover, the figure's eerie voice cut through the chaos. "He got you," she hissed. Her long, ghostly fingers wrapped tightly around his body, pulling him back into her grasp. Young Jin struggled, but the creature's grip was unrelenting, her mocking laughter echoing through the storm. Young Jin crashed hard onto the wet pavement, pain shooting through his back as he skidded across the ground. His body screamed in agony, his voice echoing, "It hurts. It really hurts." Behind him, the creature's grotesque form contorted and creaked, her joints bending unnaturally as she prepared to pounce again. The eerie sound sent shivers down his spine. In full panic mode, Young Jin bolted, his heart racing, the creature relentlessly chasing him. "Damn, this isn't a dream," he realized, every step feeling heavier as the reality of the nightmare became terrifyingly clear. Young Jin sprinted into a narrow alleyway, his body barely squeezing between the towering buildings. His breath came in ragged gasps as he slowed down, clutching his chest, trying to steady himself. The rain continued to pour, mixing with the sweat and fear clinging to him. Looking back, he assessed the tight space. With how narrow this is, she won't be able to get in, right? He muttered to himself, desperately hoping he was safe for now. Yongjin, gasping for breath, collapsed against the wall, his legs shaking uncontrollably. His heart pounded as he tried to process the terror of the chase. Just as he thought he was safe, a cold, mocking voice echoed through the narrow alley. "Did you think I couldn't come?" the voice taunted from above. His eyes widened in horror as the masked figure with the eerie smile appeared above him, hanging upside down, effortlessly defying gravity. Yongjin could only stare in shock as the figure leaned in closer, its voice dripping with annoyance. "I'm slim, you know." Fear gripped him as he realized there was no escape. Yongjin desperately tried to move, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. Panic filled his eyes as he struggled to escape, but his body refused to cooperate. "My legs won't move," he gritted his teeth, tears mixing with the rain as fear overtook him. The figure loomed closer, its red eyes glowing ominously from behind the mask. In a dirty semi-basement room with no mom or dad, the voice echoed, cruel and mocking. "You're hiding it from your friends because you're ashamed too." The words pierced through Yongjin's heart, bringing out his deepest fears. "It's really miserable. Why do you even live?" the figure sneered, its words pushing him further into despair. Yongjin's breath hitched as he tried to block out the words, but the truth stung too much. Yongjin screamed, his voice echoing off the narrow alley walls, "Somebody help!" But the rain drowned his plea, and the oppressive silence of the city surrounded him. The creature's cold hands tightened around his face, pulling him closer. "Look, Yongjin," the voice hissed, its tone disturbingly calm amidst the chaos, "you don't have anyone who will come to help you." Yongjin trembled, fear and despair mixing in his eyes as the creature continued, "Just give up now. You don't have to struggle to live anymore." Its words slithered into his mind like poison, pushing him closer to the edge of hopelessness. Yongjin dashed through the narrow alley, adrenaline coursing through his veins as the creature lunged after him. "Quan Yongjin," it screeched, its red eyes glowing with fury. The creature stretched its long, ghostly arms forward, almost catching him. "You," it shouted, frustration leaking into its voice, "seriously?" Yongjin's heart pounded as he pushed his legs harder, trying to escape. "Why are you resisting so much?" the creature bellowed in desperation, its monstrous form twisting as it relentlessly chased him. But Yongjin kept running, determined not to let fear or the creature's words break him. The creature's eyes blazed with intense red light, its voice filled with raw fury. "Just give me your body," it screeched, its hands trembling in frustration. Yongjin dodged, but the creature was relentless. "I'll make it easier for you," it promised, closing in on him, its ghostly hand reached out, trying to snatch him. "Just like Huisoo," it yelled, gripping his arm, trying to force him to submit. As Yongjin sprinted desperately down the narrow alley, the creature screeched behind him, its voice echoing with rage, You come here!" It leaped after him with frightening speed, its monstrous form cutting through the air like a shadow of death. Yongjin's heart pounded as he tried to outpace it, his mind racing for any way to escape the relentless pursuit. The creature's claws stretched out, just inches from him, fueled by a single purpose, to claim his body. The creature's claws raked across Yongjin's back, sending a spray of blood into the air. He crashed to the ground, pain coursing through his body as he gasped in shock. The creature hovered over him, its voice laced with frustration and anger. "Oh my, I told you to come here," it clenched its hands, trembling in frustration. "I've ruined everything. My body." Creak, creak. The creature, now fully enraged, demanded through its red, glowing eyes, "What are you going to do about this?" Its scream echoed, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of doom. Yongjin lay on the ground, blood pooling around him as his thoughts spiraled. Am I really going to die like this? His vision blurred, and he questioned the reality of his fate. He began reflecting on his life, but when I think about it, was there really a need to live? Scenes from his life flashed before his eyes, the isolation of his dimly lit room, the loneliness reflected in a cold text message, and the suffocating monotony of his existence. Living like this. His face contorted in despair, and the haunting thought echoed in his mind, maybe it's better to die. Suddenly, a memory resurfaced, a conversation about dreams where people around him get hurt. His realization crept in, those dreams. I guess they're not just superstitions. As the world around him darkened further, the eerie figure loomed over Yongjin's motionless body, a dark, menacing aura radiating around it. Blood spilled from his wounds, pooling on the ground beneath him as his lifeless eyes stared ahead. The creature's twisted face contorted into a chilling grin, its voice echoing with malice, "If I can't have Quan Yongjin." It wrapped its large hand around Yongjin's head, a brutal grip tightening as it spoke, the scene darkening, filled with an ominous promise, "I'll destroy him." The creature let out a deafening roar, its mouth wide in a display of destructive rage as it prepared to carry out its terrifying threat. As the rain continued to pour down, splashes of water echoed through the dark, eerie scene. Suddenly, the small dog charged through the puddles, its paws splashing furiously as it sprinted toward the towering, monstrous figure. The creature's enormous, haunting face contorted in confusion as the dog fearlessly leaped towards it, ready to confront the terrifying entity. With wide, bewildered eyes, the creature questioned aloud, a dog, completely taken aback by the sudden and unexpected intervention. A sharp, white light sliced through the scene, intensifying the tension of the standoff. A powerful figure appeared, standing tall and composed in the midst of the chaos, his arrival dramatic, cutting through the tension like a blade. The bright, intense light pierced the scene, disorienting the monstrous entity as it recoiled in shock. The figure swiftly drew his sword, effortlessly subduing the creature, his expression calm yet commanding, radiating authority as he gazed at the wounded boy lying on the ground, blood pooling around him. The figure turned, his long black hair swaying gently in the wind, his voice steady and cold, revealing a critical moment. He began to speak of ancient dates, calmly announcing that this was no ordinary day, in the year of Gapjin, the month of Jongse-humio, on the day of Bongsu. He smirked slightly, his golden eyes gleaming, and added in a low, almost airy tone, "Happy birthday," before turning toward the boy. His words sent chills through the air, leaving an impression of mystery and power. Standing tall with his sword resting at his side, the man finally revealed the truth, "My descendant," confirming the connection between them. Yongjin awoke abruptly, drenched in perspiration, his heart pounding in his chest, gasping for air as he wondered why it was suddenly so intensely hot and why his phone seemed dead. Frantically fumbling around him, searching blindly with his hands, his eyes finally landed on his phone screen, which then erupted with a cascade of notifications. Bolting upright in bed, panic gripping him, he exclaimed, "What time is it anyway?" glancing at his phone display which read 11:20 a.m. Overwhelmed by a sudden rush of lateness, he frantically began gathering his clothes for washing, muttering about his tardiness as he questioned when he had even fallen asleep the previous night and the quality of his sleep. Trying to grasp the fading tendrils of a dream, the vivid terror of losing his hand, the horrifying image of it severed, he shook his head and tried to dismiss it, saying, "It was just a dream, thankfully." But then, fragments of the previous night's actual events began to surface, the encounter with Li Hu, and then. Suddenly, his phone buzzed incessantly with calls from his homeroom teacher. He answered, spoke briefly, and his expression shifted to visible fear as the scene transitioned to Yongjin's school. The camera focused on the athlete statue standing prominently on the school grounds as Yongjin walked past it, noticing groundskeepers working nearby, their brows furrowed in confusion. One of them grumbled, "Who unplugged it again?" while another sighed in response, "Who could it be this time?" "It's always these youngsters messing around," both men visibly sweating from their labor in the heat. Yongjin, still flustered and acutely aware of his lateness, internally questioned as he hurried towards the school gate, "What's going on? I definitely came to school today." Before the scene shifted to Yongjin walking down a school corridor. Peering through a classroom window, he saw students inside, one student inquiring about lunch, "What are we having for lunch today?" and another replied pragmatically, "We'll eat whatever they give us, and only then will we be able to actually eat." Two girls strolled past Yongjin, their conversation centered on Li Hu, one girl commenting with a puzzled tone, "Why is she acting so strange today?" and the other responding with a shrug, "Who knows what's going on with those two boys?" Overhearing this, Yongjin thought to himself, a sense of unease creeping in, "There are some very strange people around here." Inside the classroom, two students were seen engaging Li Hu in conversation, seeming to question her intently. However, Li Hu remained silent and unyielding. Yongjin, spotting Li Hu, observed that she seemed unharmed, leading him to wonder internally, is young Jin okay? As the terrifying events of the previous day resurfaced in his mind, and he pondered anxiously, what about tomorrow? Should I go and ask her? Young Jin hesitated before shifting his gaze to Li Hu. Suddenly, Young Jin's friends approached him, one of them remarking, he arrived at school during lunchtime. Young Jin has clearly broken the rules. Another friend chimed in, yeah, he's definitely broken a rule today. Nervously glancing behind him, unsure of what they were implying, Young Jin hesitated. One of his friends continued, why were you ignoring our messages? He sighed, then added, I was getting worried because you were late, and the moment you arrived, you abandoned your friends and looked for your girlfriend. Young Jin protested, trying to explain his tardiness, exactly, it's not like that today. I'm late because last night. But his words trailed off as his gaze fell to the side, where Li Hu stood with her friends. Young Jin's friend then made a sarcastic remark, gesturing subtly towards Li Hu or her intense demeanor, look at that pastor over there. It's like she's about to go home, and he came here to see his girlfriend, before Young Jin's friend then extended his middle finger in a playful gesture while adjusting his glasses. At this point, Young Jin, visibly frightened by Li Hu's presence, quickly sat down, his friend noticing Young Jin's sudden reaction and commenting, what are you doing? One friend teased another about his excitement at seeing a girl, even before making eye contact, and declared he wasn't jealous. The friends laughed, but Young Jin was disturbed and abruptly left. His departing friend called him worthless. In class, Young Jin was detached, preoccupied with thoughts of yesterday. He couldn't remember what happened after being seriously injured and lying on the road, about to die. He recalled a ghost's face and wondered if yesterday was a dream. He checked his bank balance and was shocked to see the money Li Hu had transferred, making him doubt it was just a dream. He considered returning the money and his phone to Li Hu but decided against it for now, reasoning that she seemed fine. He wouldn't tell her anything about school until things got worse. Outside in the schoolyard, Young Jin noticed the athlete statue was missing. In the school office, teacher Young questioned his lateness. Young Jin vaguely said he was late because he slept in. Teacher Young dismissed him, telling him to go to class. As Young Jin walked while looking at his phone, Li Hu suddenly appeared beside him, startling him. She apologized for scaring him and explained she waited outside the office because she heard he was called there. She asked if he heard the class bell and playfully teased him about stalking being his hobby. Young Jin was still unnerved and glanced around nervously, finding the corridor empty. Li Hu smiled and approached him, asking if they were now strangers. Young Jin suggested they talk somewhere else more populated, saying it wasn't because he was scared, but he didn't know when she might attack him again. Li Hu scoffed, saying yesterday she had possessed by a ghost and not want to attack him. Li Hu stated that explaining everything would be a long story and changed the subject, saying they needed to find out about the statue. She apologized for pushing him too hard yesterday, gesturing to where the statue should be, seemingly dismissing the matter. Young Jin was bewildered by her nonchalance and muttered about a statue being in front of the school gate. As they looked back, they were stunned to see statue appear in that very spot. Li Hu was also surprised, exclaiming it hadn't been there before. Now, statue faced them. As statue began running towards them. Alarmed, Young Jin and Li Hu fled. As they ran, Young Jin asked what Li Hu had done this time. Li Hu protested her innocence. Young Jin sarcastically asked if she was going to follow him like yesterday. Li Hu, chasing him, cried out that she loved him completely and could explain everything. She tried to justify her actions from yesterday, mentioning she had attacked and was in a horse stance, named Sun Gaksen. Young Jin cut her off, telling her to shut up and run faster. Spotting a ball trolley, he jumped on it and propelled it towards the pursuing statue. The balls scattered, but the statue effortlessly dodged them and continued chasing them. They kept running until they reached a more populated area. Li Hu stopped and threw something from her pocket at the statue, but it deflected the projectiles with a flick of its finger. The objects ricocheted back and hit Li Hu in the face. She cried out in pain. Spotting an open doorway nearby, Young Jin grabbed Li Hu, pulling her along, and they dashed inside, slamming the door shut and quickly locking the grill, securing them inside for the moment. Safe, at least temporarily, they both looked back at the statues outside, which paused and stared back at them for a moment before abruptly turning and walking away. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though the statue had given up and retreated, but then, Li Hu noticed someone outside, uprooting a flagpole. It was the statue, now wielding the flagpole as a makeshift pole vault, clearly preparing to vault over the building to reach them. Seeing this, Young Jin and Li Hu's situation took a turn for the worse as Young Jin spotted a garbage trolley nearby, and the statue was now shown leaping over the building with spectacular, almost iconic, movements and landed with a resounding thud. "Move aside!" Young Jin yelled to Li Hu, grabbing the heavy garbage trolley and shoving it directly into the statue's path. The statue landed squarely in the garbage trolley, losing its balance and stumbling forward, colliding heavily with a nearby post, crashing down and scattering all the garbage from the trolley all over itself. Witnessing this chaotic scene, both Young Jin and Li Hu instinctively covered their noses, gagging at the sudden stench. "Quick, run away from here!" Young Jin urged again, but the statue, now enraged and completely covered in refuse, swiftly reappeared directly in front of them, effectively blocking their escape route. It grabbed Young Jin forcefully by the throat and lifted him high into the air as Young Jin gasped in agony, desperately struggling against the statue's unyielding grip. Li Hu, completely shocked by the statue's sudden and violent aggression, frantically reached into her pocket once more, pulling out a bracelet made of walnuts and quickly consuming one. Then, murmuring some unintelligible words under her breath, Li Hu called out to the statue, forcefully drawing its attention, and the statue turned its head towards her. Li Hu then threw the walnut bracelet directly at the statue's face. The bracelet struck the statue's face with force, causing a small, unexpected explosion, and the statue recoiled in apparent pain, clutching its face with its hands. Young Jin that had been carrying slipped from its grasp and clattered to the ground as Li Hu seized this opportune moment, grabbing the Young Jin and immediately running away. "Young Jin, are you okay?" she called back to him, and Young Jin, still struggling desperately, managed to gasp out, "Till now, I'm fine. I don't know what will happen later." Both of them fled once more, desperately seeking another place to hide, finding refuge behind some kind of structure where, in the background, Li Hu performing what appeared to be rituals, lighting incense sticks, smoke drifting. Young Jin, noticing the smoke, asked Li Hu, "Do you smoke?" Li Hu, seemingly misunderstanding his question entirely, replied with confusion, "What are you talking about?" Li Hu is lighting incense sticks here, picking up an incense stick and beginning to wave it around Young Jin, performing a ritualistic cleansing motion. Young Jin, increasingly bewildered by her actions, asked, "What are you doing all this for, Li Hu?" Li Hu replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, Li Hu is doing a ritual so that Li Hu can remove negativity from Young Jin's surroundings, before she then reached into her pocket yet again, pulling out some brightly colored cloths and began to unwrap them. Young Jin, becoming increasingly perplexed by her seemingly endless supply of items, exclaimed, seriously, "What kind of things do you keep pulling out of there?" Li Hu, tearing off strips of the cloth, said reassuringly, "This will be good for Young Jin. Just keep it with you. Don't take it off your wrist," as she began tying the strips of cloth around Young Jin's wrist. Young Jin watched her intently, his expression unreadable, a mixture of confusion and exasperation, and after she finished, Young Jin made a face, looking at Li Hu with a complex expression. "You're very weird, do you know that?" Young Jin finally stated, and Li Hu responded, "It seems I understand your suspicion, but trust me, I haven't done anything wrong," before she then posed a question to Young Jin, "Shall we go talk after school?" Young Jin, without hesitation and with bluntness, replied, "No," and walked away, leaving Li Hu standing there alone. As Young Jin walked away, Li Hu called after him, "It's fine for now. Let's just assume you'll be there tomorrow," her voice taking on a slightly melancholic tone as she continued, "It was because of a ghost, and what happened today was just a coincidence." She paused for a moment, then added softly, "What happens after that? Ever since I met you, weird things have started happening to me," and Li Hu looked genuinely sad after saying this. She stopped Young Jin as he walked past her, saying earnestly, "It's not because of me that we are together in this situation. Thank you for saving me today," but then, abruptly adopting a deliberately rude tone, she added, "Yes, it's true I saw you, but all this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't met me in the first place." With that slightly contradictory statement, Young Jin continued to walk away, leaving Li Hu looking dejected. The scene shifted to evening as Young Jin was on his way home, and upon reaching his apartment and opening the door, his gaze immediately fell upon the cloth tied around his hand. He recalled Li Hu's words, because it was made at night. First, don't take that off, and while untying the cloth, he wondered aloud, what does she want to do this time? Young Jin removed the cloth from his wrist, crumpled it up, and tossed it into the dustbin before opening his room door and switching on the light, seeing his dog inside. The dog was standing there, looking expectantly at him, and Young Jin panicked at the sudden sight, stumbling backwards in surprise as he suddenly remembered everything. He himself had brought this stray dog inside. It seems you were inside all day, he remarked, carefully observing the dog. You must be very hungry today. You haven't eaten anything the whole day. Before pondering what to feed it, gulab jamun or sausage? He opted for sausage, placing it in the dog's dish. The dog began sniffing at the food when Young Jin's mobile phone, lying on his bed, suddenly vibrated. He picked it up, and then, he distinctly heard a voice. It's the same thing again, and again, the voice spoke, clearer this time. Give me something good to eat? Young Jin, hearing someone else's voice in his own room, whirled around to look at the dog, slowly, cautiously turning back, giving the dog a sidelong glance as the dog simply made a cute, pleading face, looking at its dish of food. But Young Jin was absolutely certain he had heard someone's voice and began checking around the room, his unease intensifying. He cautiously picked up the dog, examining it closely, searching for any hidden devices, but the dog reacted angrily to being handled so abruptly, becoming agitated and scolding Young Jin. How dare you? Young Jin quickly put the dog back down on the floor, standing up and staring at it in utter disbelief, muttering to himself, this dog is talking? Am I going crazy here? Do I have schizophrenia? Before he laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the impossible. The dog looked at the dish of food, then back up at Young Jin, and stated matter-of-factly, are you denying reality? I admit that I suddenly appeared before you. Before it then, seemingly effortlessly, and using some unseen force, opened a nearby drawer. Clothes flew out, hitting Young Jin directly in the face, and among the scattered garments was the same bloodstained cloth Young Jin had been wearing yesterday when he was injured, with a noticeable piece of the cloth missing. Does that happen to you after seeing all this? The dog questioned, its tone accusatory. Seeing the bloodstained cloth and witnessing the dog's undeniably strange actions, Young Jin's memories of the previous day flooded back, losing his hand, the near-death experience. Are you with her? Young Jin asked the dog, his voice now laced with fear. The dog began biting at nearby objects in frustration, retorting, how are you talking to me? This is the first time in my life. Before it then mimicked Young Jin's usual blank, unexpressive face. Who's talking to whom here? The dog demanded. The dog asked Young Jin to call someone. It sounded as if the dog was imitating someone who had given birth to Young Jin, referring to his family, adding, with the help of Young Jin's family here, the dog will try to understand the situation. As Young Jin says he has no family, the dog asks, does he mean, has Young Jin's family left from here? Young Jin stood up, completely bewildered by the dog's pronouncements. What are you talking about all of a sudden? The dog explains that it is talking about the rest of the family, but Young Jin retorted, he told the dog, he has no one. After that stark declaration, the dog fell silent for a moment, seemingly processing this information before it suddenly remarked, abruptly changing the subject again, dog says he saved him using its power. The dog doesn't feel like it has come to the wrong place here, pausing again, and then asking, he didn't even say thank you for saving his life. Young Jin glanced sideways at the dog. After all, you saved me, he acknowledged grudgingly, so, tell me, you are a monster who can transform. Hearing the word monster, the dog took a long breath. Who is Young Jin calling a monster? How dare Young Jin call the dog's ancestor a monster? Hearing this outlandish claim from the dog, Young Jin stared at it, utterly incredulous. You are my ancestor? A street dog, he scoffed in disbelief, before then adding sarcastically, does that mean I am a dog too? The dog jumped up and down, visibly agitated by Young Jin's mockery. You idiot! I am not a dog. Hearing this denial, Young Jin quipped, I'll get you a mirror here, but the dog clarified, exasperated, I am not talking about this dog body that I borrowed for a while, but you can hear my voice, no? After hearing that confirmation, Young Jin asked, if that's the case, then why is your mouth moving? Why are you walking like that? To which the dog replied, it hurts because right now I'm in a dog's body, leading Young Jin to summarize, stating it as a simple fact, this means you are a dog. Hearing this blunt statement, the dog became enraged, stomping its paws on the floor and exclaiming, if I had a human body, I would have come into it, I would have given you a few slaps. Young Jin, completely ignoring the dog's outburst, said calmly, "Whoever you are a dog right now." But the dog retorted, "I told you, no. I'm not originally a dog here." And Young Jin, with a touch of dark humor, concluded, "Then it's good. So you are my ghost ancestor." Hearing Young Jin's words, the dog became absolutely furious, pacing back and forth agitatedly, exclaiming, "Sometimes ghost, sometimes dog.